One morning, everything changed. People woke up, grabbed their phones, opened their crypto apps, and felt their stomachs drop straight to the floor. Because XRP was bleeding. Not a little dip, not a normal correction, but a full-on, brutal, terrifying crash that wiped billions from the market in hours. And wallets that had been growing for months, sometimes years, were suddenly showing numbers that made people physically sick. And the worst part was that nobody was giving a straight answer about why it was happening. The news headlines were vague. The influencers were either panicking or suspiciously quiet. Social media was a war zone of fear and anger and confusion. And regular people, real investors, people who had put their savings and their hopes and their future plans into XRP, were watching it all burn with absolutely no idea what to do next. Some sold, some held, some just stared at the screen frozen, unable to process what was happening in real time. And that day became known in crypto circles as XRP Black Monday. And if you think you already know the full story of what happened, I promise you that you do not. Because the surface story, the one that got reported and recycled across every crypto YouTube channel and finance blog, was only a fraction of the truth. The real story goes deeper, much deeper. And once you understand what actually happened, who was involved, what the on-chain data really showed, and what it all means for the future of XRP, you will never look at this asset the same way again. So settle in, because we are going all the way in on this one. Every detail, every layer, every uncomfortable truth that the mainstream narrative conveniently left out. And to understand Black Monday, you first have to understand what XRP actually is, and why it has always been different from every other major cryptocurrency. Because Bitcoin was created as a decentralized alternative to traditional money. Ethereum was built as a programmable blockchain for smart contracts, but XRP was built with a very specific, very practical purpose: to revolutionize the way money moves across borders. Because international money transfers are slow, expensive, and riddled with inefficiencies. And Ripple looked at that problem and said, "We can fix this," designing XRP to be the bridge currency that makes international transfers fast and cheap and seamless. And that genuinely innovative real-world use case attracted a very different kind of investor, not just speculators chasing quick gains, but long-term believers who understood the technology, who followed the development closely, who genuinely believed XRP was going to play a fundamental role in the future of global finance. And that community, that belief, that dedication, made what happened on Black Monday hit even harder. Because it was not just a price crash, it felt like a betrayal. And here is where the story gets complicated and uncomfortable, and honestly, little disturbing, because XRP had been under attack for years before Black Monday ever happened. The legal battle between Ripple and the SEC had been dragging on and casting a shadow over XRP like a dark cloud that never fully went away. The SEC claiming XRP was an unregistered security, Ripple fighting back, arguing it was a currency, not a security. And while the case worked its way through the courts, XRP sat in a kind of limbo, too controversial for many institutional investors to touch, too legally uncertain for major U.S. exchanges to comfortably list, and constantly at the mercy of whatever the latest legal development happened to be. And the people who understood the legal timeline, who had access to information about what was coming, who could anticipate the market's reaction to upcoming developments, those people had a massive advantage over ordinary retail investors who were just watching the price and trying to make sense of the noise. And that information asymmetry, the gap between what insiders knew and what regular people knew, was enormous. And on Black Monday, that gap became a weapon, because here is the thing about financial markets. Nothing happens without leaving a trail. The blockchain is a public ledger. Every transaction, every wallet movement, every transfer of XRP is recorded permanently and transparently for anyone who knows how to read it. And what the on-chain data showed in the days leading up to Black Monday was deeply, deeply interesting. Because large wallets that had been completely dormant for extended periods, some of them inactive for well over a year, suddenly came to life and started moving funds. Not small amounts, but hundreds of millions of XRP. And when multiple dormant wallets all become active around the same time, all moving funds in the same direction, all doing so within a compressed time frame, that pattern starts to look less like coincidence and more like coordination. And what these wallets were doing was moving their XRP to exchanges, specifically to the kind of exchange infrastructure you use when you want to sell quickly and at scale. And this positioning happened approximately 48 hours before the crash. 48 hours. A very specific, very deliberate window, long enough to get everything in place without being too obvious, short enough to move before any broader market reaction could develop. And whoever was doing this knew the crash was coming. And there are several possible explanations, and I want to be honest about all of them. Because possibility one is that these players had access to material non-public information about an upcoming regulatory development they knew would tank the price. Possibility two is that they had simply done better analysis than everyone else and made a calculated decision to reduce exposure before the broader market caught on. And possibility three, the most uncomfortable one, is that there was a coordinated effort by large players to deliberately trigger a price crash for their own benefit, dump the price, shake out retail holders, buy back at lower prices, and profit on the recovery, a strategy known as a bear raid. And I am not telling you which explanation is correct. I am telling you the data is consistent with at least one of them being true, and the day itself was pure, unfiltered market chaos. Because as XRP's price began to drop slowly at first, then accelerating, panic spread through the community like wildfire. Social media lit up, Telegram groups exploded, Reddit threads were moving so fast you could barely read them, and fear in financial markets is contagious. When people see a price falling and see other people panicking, the rational brain gets bypassed and the survival instinct kicks in. Sell, get out, protect what you have left. And that is exactly what happened. Wave after wave of retail investors hitting the sell button, each wave of selling pushing the price lower, which triggered more fear, which triggered more selling in a cascading spiral that fed on itself and accelerated the crash far beyond what those initial wallet movements could have caused on their own. And by the time the selling pressure exhausted itself, the damage was extraordinary. Billions in market capitalization had evaporated. Long-term holders were sitting on devastating losses, and the community was shaken to its core. But here is where the story takes its first major twist, and this twist changes everything. Because in the hours immediately following the crash, while the community was still in shock, while the headlines were screaming about the death of XRP, while panic sellers were desperately calculating their losses, the same wallet clusters that had been selling aggressively in the lead-up to the crash started buying. Not immediately, not obviously, but within 6 hours of the price hitting its lowest point, accumulation began. Quiet at first, then more aggressive. And these wallets that had helped trigger the crash were now hoovering up capital XRP at the discounted prices they had helped create. Because this is one of the oldest strategies in finance. Create selling pressure to drive the price down. Buy the dip at depressed prices, then let the market naturally recover and profit massively on the way back up. And the retail investors who panic sold at the bottom were the exit liquidity for the initial sellers. And the initial sellers were now buying from those panic sellers at the lowest prices. It was a wealth transfer, clean, brutal, and devastatingly effective. And when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, Black Monday did not happen in isolation. It happened within a broader geopolitical and regulatory and financial context that is essential to understanding what capital XRP is facing. Because the world of international finance is not a neutral, open, free market. It is deeply political, controlled by institutions with enormous power and enormous interests to protect. And XRP represents a direct challenge to some of those interests, because the traditional correspondent banking system is slow and expensive, yes, but it is also enormously profitable. Banks make significant money from international transfer fees. The inefficiencies of the current system are not just a bug. For many established players, they are a feature that generates billions in revenue every year. And along comes XRP promising to make international transfers fast and cheap. And from the perspective of institutions that profit from those inefficiencies, that sounds like a very serious threat. And powerful institutions that feel threatened do not simply accept disruption. They fight back using every tool available: regulatory pressure, legal challenges, narrative control, market manipulation. And the sustained regulatory pressure on XRP, the years-long legal battle, the uncertainty that kept institutional investors on the sidelines, it starts to look very much different when you see it through this lens. It starts to look less like legitimate regulatory concern and more like a coordinated effort to kneecap a competitor. But the aftermath of Black Monday was not what most casual observers would have predicted, because while the narrative was overwhelmingly negative, XRP is dead, Ripple is finished, the SEC will win. The on-chain data told a very different story. New wallets were opening. Long-term holders who had not sold during the crash were adding to their positions at discounted prices. The fundamentals had not changed. The technology still worked. The partnerships were still in place. The real-world use case was still valid. And slowly, gradually, the price began to recover. First tentatively, then with more momentum, then with genuine strength. And the recovery that followed Black Monday was not just a bounce. It was a statement that XRP had genuine staying power, genuine utility, genuine demand. And that resilience was a powerful signal about the asset's fundamental strength. And right now, three major catalysts are building simultaneously in the background. First, regulatory clarity. Because when the legal status of capital XRP is clearly and definitively established, the floodgates for institutional capital could open in a way that would be genuinely dramatic. Second, Ripple's partnership pipeline. Because when major financial institutions formally adopt capital XRP for their international payment infrastructure, the real-world demand for capital XRP as a utility asset increases in a very concrete way. And third, the tokenomics of capital XRP itself. Because the supply dynamics are shifting in ways that historically precede significant price movements. And when supply tightens and demand increases simultaneously, price movements can be dramatic and fast. And the final lesson of Black Monday comes down to 5 things. Understand the nature of the market you are operating in. Learn to read the on-chain signals. Manage your emotions because fear is always someone else's opportunity. Think in terms of time horizon because the people who came out of Black Monday strong were the ones who could wait for the recovery. And do your own deep, genuine research because understanding your investment is the foundation of the emotional resilience you need to hold through Black Monday-level events without making decisions you will regret. Because the final chapter of the XRP Black Monday story has not been written yet. The forces that caused it are still active, but so are the forces on the other side. The genuine utility, the growing regulatory clarity, the accumulating institutional adoption, the resilient and dedicated community that did not break on Black Monday. It bent, it hurt, but it did not break. And that resilience is real. That staying power is real. And for investors who understand what they are holding and why, that is ultimately the most important thing. Not the price on any given day, not the narrative on any given platform, but the fundamental underlying truth of what XRP is and what it does and why it matters. That truth survived Black Monday, and it will survive whatever comes next.